Story 1. Ever again is a long time, so probably not soon. The circumstances of World War I and World War II were quite special. Story 2. Would a large war involve multiple nations? Yes. Would it be a world war? No. Why not? Because at the time of the First and Second World Wars, the world was heavily colonized and, in that regard, much smaller than it is today. A war in Europe today does not automatically mean the rest of the world will join as they did then. Ultimately, it does not matter whether it is called a world war. A large multi-nation war would be destructive enough to cause widespread devastation. Story 3. Probably not. Many powerful countries have nuclear weapons, and a World War III would be so destructive that it would be in almost nobody's interest to start one. Story 4. Yes, every century has had massive large-scale wars. Why should it not happen in this century when it has happened in so many previous centuries? Often it occurs after those who experienced the last large-scale war have died. Today, the last survivors of World War II are passing away. Consider how few people are in the chain of command authorized to launch nuclear weapons. It would only take a few mad individuals. It is naive to assume that those in power are always purely rational. There will be no referendum about whether to use nuclear weapons. A handful of people could make that decision. I think the main reason many do not believe a new large-scale world war is likely is that current generations have grown up without one, so it feels like something from history rather than reality. People who grew up in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s feared it more because a generation that had experienced World War II was still alive. Story 5. Not physically. No. It could be argued, however, that we have been in a perpetual world war since 1945, with a small window of respite in the decade between the collapse of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and its satellites and the September 11th attacks in 2001. Story 6. It's worth remembering that we always prepare for the war that has just happened, not the war to come. The war in Ukraine is showing a few anomalies, namely, 1. Russian steamroller tactics from the 19th century cannot compete with well-organized opponents. 2. Technology is useful. Drones and intelligence remain decisive. 3. It is still a numbers game. If Ukraine can put enough boots on the ground, that matters. 4. The average age of combatants in Ukraine is in their 40s, rather than previous wars like World War II, where the average age was 26. 5. Aircraft carriers, nuclear weapons, and submarines are nearly useless for conflicts like the one in Ukraine. 6. Logistics, including deep operational logistics, still reigns supreme. 7. Nuclear weapons and threats to use them are ineffective. They primarily act as a deterrent against complete capitulation. The wild card, as I see it, is the insanity factor. It is worth remembering that in World War II, even though there were irrational leaders like Stalin, no side employed its stockpiles of chemical weapons, with the exception of incendiaries such as napalm. The challenge we have is that during the Cold War we were occasionally one mistake away from obliteration. The erosion of norms now means we are more often one miscalculation from a full-scale crisis. The other challenge is social cohesion in the West. Social media has been an effective instrument for misinformation, seeding division and fragmenting public views. I suspect that if two major powers go toe-to-toe, we will see previously unknown technologies taken out of storage as the situation dictates their need. These will be capabilities we can hardly imagine, developed since World War II and kept under wraps until the time comes. Story 7. I would say it's possible, but I would lean toward the unlikely side. War has changed, and more importantly, the people who would lead these wars have changed. I can't imagine an oligarch like Vladimir Putin wanting to live in a bunker for the rest of his life. I also can't see Donald Trump choosing to stay in a bunker instead of playing golf every day. If China invaded Taiwan, I don't see a direct large-scale war between China and the United States or China invading the United States. Instead, the conflict would be fought on and around Taiwan until one side concedes. Story 8. The nature of war is changing. We will probably see large, multinational conflicts, but they are not going to be fought by large infantry and mechanized battalions marching and rolling across wide open spaces to take towns. Future wars will move too quickly, with highly tactical, surgical strikes that target warfighting capabilities. Countries can target each other's governments and economic functions with pinpoint accuracy and at a speed that would make a World War II general's head spin. Wars of the future may resemble recent conflicts such as Iraq and Afghanistan. An attacking country cripples the command and leadership infrastructure of the defender, and then occupying forces move in and take over. Heavy resistance movements will form, and the resulting insurgency will last decades, with interested third and fourth parties doing everything they can to influence the conflict. Story 9. Short term. Unlikely because nuclear weapons make such wars either impossible or extremely brief. Rational states on each side will realize that a single reckless ally could detonate a nuclear weapon and trigger a lose-lose scenario for everyone. Long term, technological advances may neutralize nuclear weapons, making World War III conceivable again. Very long term, literal interplanetary world wars. For example, Mars versus Earth. Story 10. Just wait a couple of months. Our leaders are apparently bored, antsy, and tired of their constituents trying to hold them accountable. Story 11. It will not happen if the elites of each country agree to keep modern slavery alive and well. Why go to war when you can exploit the majority? Story 12. Probably. If humanity survives long enough, we could see wars that destroy entire planets and kill billions of people. If humanity does not survive long enough, war is a likely reason. Story 13. Consequential? Maybe. Large and destructive? No. If there were a war requiring the total annihilation of the enemy, as in World War II, it could be achieved very quickly. Even Putin isn't willing to risk a full-scale war with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. He knows that even if he could achieve victory, the cost would be so astronomical that it would be in no one's best interest. There is a chance that moves could significantly disrupt the balance, and that would likely involve China. Story 14. Unlikely. The greater risk is that there would be no winners because nuclear weapons exist. Story 15. I think another war on the scale of World War II is unlikely, mainly because nuclear weapons and global economic ties make full-scale conflict extremely risky. Regional wars could still escalate, though. For some really interesting analysis, listen to Professor Jiang. He speculates on potential conflicts and who might get involved, and his past predictions, such as regarding Israel and Iran, have been accurate. Story 16. No, because drones and nuclear weapons exist. I do not think a massive global conflict would last for years because of the devastation these weapons can produce. I can see one group destroying another, but I cannot see a prolonged ground war lasting for years. Story 17. Yes, and I fear it is going to be a lot worse than World War II, but I hope I am wrong about that. Story 18. Yes, just look at us. We have all the information at our fingertips, and yet we repeat the same mistakes made throughout history. Story 19. Eventually, resource shortages will likely lead to conflict between superpowers. Do I think the traditional World War III is coming anytime soon? I doubt it. Story 20. It has been 3.6 years since the start of the Russian special operation in Ukraine. Russian forces and their local auxiliaries have suffered approximately 300,000 deaths and approximately 700,000 casualties. For comparison, the United States had a similar population, about 140 million, during World War II, and suffered roughly 300,000 deaths and 800,000 casualties over 2.6 years of fighting in and around Europe. While it may have taken Russia about a year longer, per capita they are experiencing losses comparable to what the United States endured in the European campaign. Keep in mind that the United States suffered another approximately 110,000 deaths in the Pacific campaign. So far, the Russians appear likely to exceed that number. It may not be a world war, but it has brought significant consequences to the largest country by land area. Story 21. Absolutely possible. The conditions we are seeing now make it distinctly possible that World War III could begin tomorrow. Consider flashpoints such as Ukraine and Russia and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, China and Taiwan, North Korea and South Korea, India and China, and the Middle East. The scary part, though, is not just the existence of nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them globally. It is that a conflict could be 4 times larger. In 1939, the global population was 2.3 billion. It is now 8.2 billion. 55 million people died in World War II. Given the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and the scale of conventional weapons, we could easily see hundreds of millions die directly and from starvation as global food chains collapse. Story 22. If or when we do, it will likely be the last. As Einstein famously said, "I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." Story 23. Wait until they have enough robots to mass-produce drones. Then they will want to play war. Story 24. There will not be another physical war like World War II because it will be cyber. Why go to all the effort and cost of invading a country when you can just take its infrastructure down virtually? Story 25. Yes. The reasons are that humanity is generally unable to learn from past mistakes, and it has never been easier for radical groups to obtain or fabricate technology and weapons. Story 26. Yes, because humans are incapable of solving conflict without violence. Story 27. Probably not. Russia is too weak to start another war. China is, at worst, focused on Taiwan for now. Germany is peaceful. Story 28. Probably not, because of the scale. Armies today are much smaller and take longer to train and equip. Air forces, for example, are far more potent than in World War II, but they are also much more labor-intensive and expensive. The invasion force in the Winter War was twice the size of the force used in Ukraine, and Finland then had only 1/10 of the population of Ukraine today. That scale meant the war spread across the globe and drew in new combatants, which is why the wars escalated so much. What many people misunderstand about the world wars is that it was not two factions immediately going all in. It was an ever-escalating conflict in which each side gained new participants continuously for years until the war finally resolved. The Allies had new countries joining almost every year from 1939 to 1945, and that escalation required specific circumstances. Many states had to perceive the conflict and still decide to commit to it. Story 29. Will it happen during our lifetime? Maybe not. Ever again? Almost certainly. Humans, nations, and societies go through many cycles that usually end in a major shift in power dynamics. Unfortunately, more often than not, these shifts occur through violence, though not always. The current shift in global dominance seems to be between the United States and China. This power struggle will likely last for decades or even centuries, and it is likely we will not be alive to witness the result or the means of that shift. Ever again covers such a long period that anything can happen. Story 30. I very much doubt it. I think physical wars are now fought in less developed countries, where more powerful nations take sides and fund the combatants. Everything else is cyber warfare, espionage, and propaganda. Nuclear weapons have put a stop to traditional wars between developed, powerful nations. Now conflicts are fought as behind closed doors Cold Wars. Story 31. That is unlikely. Since World War II, there has been an era of relative peace among the major powers. There have been proxy wars, but no direct conflict between them. Despite public fears, nuclear weapons have stabilized much of the world, at least the parts that could lead to World War III. This has become even more apparent with the war Russia launched against Ukraine. There is a significant question about whether Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles would function correctly. Russia has shown itself to be largely a paper tiger. China relies on global markets to buy its goods, so a major attack would accelerate its economic decline. The majority of the world opposes. North Korea. It has no power projection capability, and China or Russia would act quickly to protect their interests. Pakistan and the United States have improved relations and are currently on better terms. France and the United Kingdom are not likely to be sources of aggression. Israel is small and focused on localized territorial disputes. India is not seeking territorial expansion. We cannot predict decades from now, but at present World War III is highly unlikely. Story 32. The problem with another world war, in addition to the lives lost, is that the weapons major powers possess today make those of earlier eras look like firecrackers on the 4th of July. We could destroy the world several times over. That is likely what would happen. In another world war, nobody would win if the world were reduced to ashes. That is why humanity is hesitant, and rightfully so. Einstein said it best himself, "I know not what weapons will be used in World War III, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. Story 33. Not for the foreseeable future, because global economies are too intertwined now. They were not as interconnected during the mercantilist and protectionist era that led to World War I, and by virtue of that conflict World War II followed. In World War II, Japan and Germany had much to gain by expanding their empires. Who has anything to gain? By territorial aggression in an era of relative free trade? A global aggressor would have everything to lose and very little to gain. The benefits would not outweigh the costs. People can say what they want about free market capitalism, but its hegemony over the global system of production has ushered in an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity. Story 34. Climate change will make conflict inevitable. People will move because of drought, famine, flood, or disease, and may face hostile nations that attempt to stop them. Crop failures in wealthier countries could lead them to try to take food from others. How the war will be fought is unknown. If you leave your home because it is unlivable and occupy a neighboring country, nuclear war is unlikely, and a decentralized government is a difficult target. Story 35. No. It would be just 1 week of hostilities like India versus Pakistan and, more recently, Thailand versus Cambodia. It is a good thing we have Russia versus Ukraine to keep them occupied. The next big conflict may be China versus Taiwan and the United States, which could occur once Russia and Ukraine reach a ceasefire. Israel and Palestine will remain a conflict regardless of the circumstances. So the usual local wars, but not large-scale wars that require alliances like the previous 2 world wars. Story 36. Many people forget that the main reason for the 2 world wars was colonization. Many territories would have remained neutral if they had been independent, but colonization forced them to align with their colonizers. If Russia had invaded Ukraine in the previous century, it would almost certainly have started a major war in Europe and might even have escalated into a world war. Now the conflict is less likely to have global impact because some of the largest countries in Asia, such as India and China, remain neutral on these issues. Story 37. Ever again is a large number. Within 100 years, I would say no. The world was siloed before World War II. Countries were basically self-sufficient and needed to expand to gain raw resources. There was also more fog of war and very little communication between world leaders. Now we have global trade. Some of the most important goods these days, like high-quality silicon chips, have production lines that span 7 countries before the final product can be made. Countries heavily rely on each other for trade, which helps maintain peace. There will always be rogue nations, such as Russia and Israel, that deviate from international norms and attack their neighbors, but the vast majority of countries have too much to lose to invade another country. Story 38. With the way things are going, if nations are not mindful, it may happen again. Story 39. Trump and Netanyahu are putting the wheels in motion for one right now. Story 40. With the way the conflicts between Russia and Ukraine and between Israel and Gaza are escalating, and with Donald Trump continuing to back the aggressors, it may become the United States against everyone else. The only way this ends is in mutual assured destruction. Story 41. Yes, maybe quite soon. I expect there is about a 10% chance that an invasion of Taiwan by the People's Republic of China will turn into a world war in the next decade. I would expect it would either be contained to a small war, as much as pure conflict can be described as small, or escalate to a nuclear conflict. I would not expect a 6-year total war as in World War II. Story 42. We will have a war unlike the previous one, but like this. Genocide. An imperialist war that the major powers will unleash. A war for monopoly over technology. A war to control everything. Every day we inch closer to war. Nations threaten that we are only an unknown number of minutes away from that location. It would be better if the world collapsed and everything turned to ashes. Story 43. Yes. We are itching for a fight. The only thing holding people back from one another is morality. The moment that is out the window, we burn. If I can name more than 5 people I know who would gladly turn on their neighbors for their political opinions, then I would say morality does not have much time left. Story 44. History says humans will always wage war. We are just that greedy, power-hungry, and dumb. Ever again is a very long time, so it will happen at some point. Story 45. War is usually the consequence of one power declining and another rising. The declining power may try to nip the rise in the bud to stay in control. There are also attempts at raiding for land or population control. Others stem from poor negotiations over ideological differences. A declining power could look like the United States of America losing most of its influence while China gains influence, but this would likely require reckless leadership in the United States. China is unlikely to strike first. It is more likely to watch the United States continually undermine itself. An ideologically based war would resemble a global civil war, similar to how Star Trek depicted World War III. If this occurred, it could begin as a civil war in a country such as the United States or the United Kingdom, potentially triggered by race and immigration. Territorial wars would trigger global involvement only if the invaded country controls a strategic resource, for example, semiconductor chips from Taiwan. A country like Ukraine is less likely to provoke worldwide action unless Russia further antagonizes the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, for example, by repeatedly violating its airspace in recent weeks. Even then, Ukraine is still unlikely to become a global conflict unless China chose to go to war for Russia, which seems unlikely. If a large war occurred, most actors would try to end it quickly unless confronting zealots. Wars are expensive, and wealthy stakeholders understand this. Unless a person's power or wealth is tightly bound to a nation-state, they are likely to negotiate with wealthy counterparts in other countries to stop the conflict. Some may profit from rebuilding, but the very richest, who are invested in the current status quo, have incentives to avoid widespread destruction. If a nation underwent a violent revolution that eliminated its wealthy class, that would create a wild card and significantly increase the likelihood of broader conflict. Story 46. In the next few hundred years, it might happen in our lifetime or it might not. Story 47. Of course, there will be other ways. Humanity has not learned from past wars. World War I and World War II were larger and bloodier because technology made killing easier. Future wars will be bloodier still until a war occurs that kills most people on the planet. Then we will begin again with small wars. Story 48. I would say yes. Simply put, some men have very small egos and will happily send other men to their deaths to defend their egos. We may have all this advanced technology, but the personality types who thirst for war and status are just as common as ever. Story 49. I have predicted this for early 2027 for some time. If it is ever going to happen, that is the time. The worrying part is that, since I started saying this, many pieces have moved into place faster than I expected. After using the military to keep the election safe, a move meant to steal the election, during the 2026 midterm elections, Democratic states will be much more openly defiant. That defiance will be met with a crackdown, especially against governors who defy President Trump, such as Gavin Newsom and Illinois Governor Pritzker. Mass protests will prompt President Trump to pull troops back from overseas because they are needed at home. The first troops to come home will be from South Korea in a rapid pullout similar to Afghanistan. This is also why he has been antagonizing South Korea, as in disputes involving Hyundai workers, to justify the withdrawal. With United States forces gone and the country focused on internal matters, the United States will be preoccupied with internal conflict, similar to Spain during World War II. North Korea would be free to attack South Korea, and China would be free to attack Taiwan. Meanwhile, Russia would be unshackled and could use everything at its disposal, including nuclear weapons, to finish off Ukraine and then begin attacks on the Baltic states. Despite people saying that cannot happen because Russia would be nuked in return, I ask, by whom? With the United States out of the picture, the only countries with active nuclear arsenals that could respond would be the United Kingdom and France. Why would they risk becoming targets by using nuclear weapons against Russia if Russia attacked, for example, Latvia? Russia has 10 times as many nuclear weapons as both of them combined. The United Kingdom and France are unlikely to risk that for the Baltic states. It does not matter if they become pariahs because they already are, and because victory is a panacea. Story 50. No, because we have nuclear weapons now, there will be no one left. Story 51. Now that we are an Axis nation, do you think we will be liberated? It would be ironic if Germany liberated us and our concentration camps. Story 52. I fear we are going to have wars that will be even worse, such as chemical warfare and environmental contamination. Some countries already do not care and are destroying and polluting the earth. Story 53. Honestly, governments are not rational. If they were, we would not have had World War I. Story 54. Yes. Next Monday. The reason is simple. Why should we work without a pension? Story 55. It is very possible. If the losing side does not accept their situation, it could lead to the eradication of humanity in about 30 minutes. Story 56. Yes. Scarcity and climate change will cause the next set of wars. Climate wars. Story 57. It will happen sooner or later. History always repeats itself. I just hope I will not be alive when it does. Story 58. Absolutely. The general tenor of Western politics points clearly toward global conflict rather than global cooperation. Story 59. Seeing Russia, its attacks, and the response from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a major war in Europe now seems almost inevitable. Story 60. I have a theory that has occurred to me lately. What if part of the reason we have not seen a larger-scale conflict is the sheer cost of modern military hardware, with aircraft and ships costing tens or hundreds of millions of dollars? Who could actually afford a sustained, modern conflict that lasts for years? For instance, current military budgets are peacetime levels and would have to ramp up many times higher to sustain and produce enough modern hardware and munitions to cover a long-term conflict. That may change with the rise of drone warfare, where cheap, disposable drones or missiles can be used to destroy tanks, ships, and aircraft at a cost thousands or tens of thousands of times lower than the platforms they target. Could a nation with a fraction of the military budget exploit this price disparity to attack a stronger nation and inflict economic damage severe enough to destroy the larger nation? I suspect we will see more conflict adopt drones because they bring down the economic cost of warfare. However, the mutually assured destruction element of nuclear weapons still prevents major powers from engaging in direct conflict. Story 61. I am off to Armageddon. Story 62. There will be another war. I cannot say when, but it will definitely be felt worldwide. Story 63. Possibly in 2030, when China attacks Taiwan and India attacks Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, and Myanmar to annex them and recreate Akhan Bharat. The United States will join India and World War III will begin. Story 64. As someone else said, ever again is a very long time, and it generally only takes a few powerful lunatics to wreak a lot of havoc, so probably. Story 65. Yes and no. Large armies, tanks, and infantry fighting each other in open areas are unlikely. But a world war with massive, record-breaking casualties, systematic genocide, and ideologically driven state actors and parties would be far worse than World War II. Story 66. No. For one thing, drone and missile warfare are modern. Infantry warfare is old-fashioned. I believe the nuclear deterrent serves to prevent nuclear war. Story 67. My country has been at peace for 80 years, as have most European countries. That is a long time in world history. From that, one could conclude that sooner or later my country will be involved in a war, possibly on its own borders. But will there be a new world war? The massive armaments of the Cold War helped prevent the outbreak of a global conflict. The United Nations, despite all its shortcomings, has acted more effectively than the League of Nations before World War II. Now, however, the great powers seem to emphasize power politics and bilateral relations more than a rules-based world order. It does not look promising, nor does the fact that countries are increasing their defense budgets in the name of peace. Weapons are not made for peace, but for war. Shipbuilding is one example. So it is entirely possible that a great war is coming. I do not think it has already started in Ukraine. It is a proxy war, and Russia is too weak to become a world power. The big war will probably start between the United States and China, if it starts. I hope I will not be alive then, but I may be. My mother, over 90 years old, was a child during World War II. I hope she never has to see another war. Story 68. I am worried nuclear weapons are not going to be the deterrent we want. If you look at photos of Hull or Dresden, it is clear that we already had mass destruction. Nuclear weapons are just quicker. Story 69. The history books of the future will say that World War III has already started. Story 70. I often see two opposing arguments about nuclear weapons. That World War III will not occur because we have them, or that World War III would destroy everything because of them. However, consider how many wars have occurred since 1945. I think World War III could occur even without nuclear weapons. States might probe each other's limits and escalate conventional attacks. Story 71. The scale of World War II is unlikely to be repeated because the existence of nuclear weapons acts as a powerful deterrent. However, that does not prevent smaller, more localized conflicts from escalating and causing significant global disruption. Story 72. It will be a religious war next. You can feel the tension building every day. Story 73. We are not far from seeing World War III occur. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization has an excuse to go to war with Russia because Russia recently sent drones and Mikoyan-Gurevich fighter jets into North Atlantic Treaty Organization countries. If North Atlantic Treaty Organization forces cross a border into Russia proper, nuclear weapons will be used. Story 74. Yes. Population in 1939 was 2.3 billion. Population today is 8.1 billion. Theoretically, a war today would only need to be 1/4 of World War II's relative scale or participation to be a comparable conflict. This is especially possible today with the highest populations in the world being relatively new major world players, China and India. India did not contribute to World War II on the scale China did. So imagine a war today in which both do. Also, their ability to organize and mobilize their populations for war is greatly increased today compared with previous world wars. Worldwide starvation and famine would ensue if international shipping lines were shut down, because the economy and food distribution have become highly globalized. Story 75. War has changed, but people have not. We are already in the late 1930s equivalent in 2025. Give it a few years. It will not be the same as World War I or World War II, but Ukraine has shown that trench warfare remains the default. The main difference now is that it rains cheap, deadly drones. Story 76. We do not fight wars that way, and someone would have to seize control of other countries. The United States is not going to allow another country to do that. Story 77. People here are delusional. Russia is fighting a war in Ukraine and has already lost more personnel than the United Kingdom or the United States did during all of World War II. This war could escalate further, since Russia seeks to threaten peace in Europe. The answer to the question is yes, and it is already happening. Story 78. It is hard to imagine because war has fundamentally changed since then. While war has always been about outproducing and outmanning your opponent, the scale and character of war have shifted. The focus has moved from causing maximum destruction to achieving near-surgical precision in attacks and operations. Defeating an army is less about killing or incapacitating large numbers and more about targeting crucial nodes such as logistics and leadership. There are bombs that can strike individual rooms in a building from miles away, so there is no reason to level an entire city. Armies are now smaller but better equipped and carry out more complex operations. Yet conflicts often begin with new gadgets and can still devolve into trench warfare or primitive fighting. Nuclear weapons remain an existential risk. It is hard to imagine a world-scale conflict that would not risk nuclear escalation if one side is pushed into a corner. Story 79. Yeah, I think wars will just be digital from now on, not as in a Call of Duty lobby but as in cyber attacks on important locations or systems until a country or organization collapses. That kind of sucks because I always dreamed of manning a machine gun in the trenches next to the love of my life, who would be a survivor of the Battle of the Osowiec Fortress. Story 80. Humanity is foolish. We will likely destroy ourselves. Story 81. We are engaged in a war that is far worse. It is not a bloody battlefield conflict. Story 82. It is very doubtful for the simple reason of nuclear weapons. If you take the situation with Russia and Ukraine, there is pressure not to use nuclear weapons. Russia has threatened to use small tactical nuclear weapons. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the United States said that if Russia does, it is totally on. But things are slowly escalating. Russia could be playing a game of small provocations, hoping that NATO is too afraid to retaliate. If things escalate and NATO enters a full-scale war with Russia, Vladimir Putin may feel threatened enough to use nuclear weapons. Generally, if Russia and China made moves at the same time, if China went after Taiwan and escalated a war in the South China Sea, sooner or later one of them might use a nuclear weapon if they felt backed into a corner. If you look at Japan in World War II, they were bombed twice to force surrender. Japan did not have nuclear weapons. The Americans were winning and were preparing to invade Japan. If Japan had had nuclear weapons, they might have used them when invasion was imminent. The big fear is dropping a bomb in a heavily populated area, but if battles were at sea, as between the United States and Japan, one side might have been less reluctant to use a nuclear weapon if it targeted military forces. That is why people discuss tactical nuclear weapons. Story 83. Inevitable. The United States is declining, China is rising. One seeks to contain the other instead of working together for the benefit of humankind. Story 84. No. The enemy's weapons of choice are sedation and slavery, mindless entertainment, corporate control, medical dependence, and pornography addiction. Story 85. It's crazy to think about. They prepare for such a time even by advancing technologies, but in the end it is unlikely to actually happen. I was watching several episodes of Diary of a Chief Executive Officer and listening to recent guests. From what was said, it sounded like some billionaires are leading us towards something catastrophic. We might see the beginning early next year and be deep into it by 2027. One speaker gave an example. A close friend in the artificial intelligence field publicly praises how beneficial the technology will be, but privately acknowledges it could lead to something the world has never seen. He warned that the next decade could be a nightmare with millions dying, and that friend showed no empathy about that outcome. Story 86. I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. Albert Einstein. Story 87. If there are enough global allied treaties, colonies, or imperial possessions connecting countries, conflicts could boil over internationally. If the United Nations and diplomatic relations were ignored or destroyed, then yes. In my opinion, if there is a World War III, it would be caused by someone trying to control major shipping lanes such as the Panama Canal, the Suez Canal, and the Northwest Passage around Greenland and Canada. It would cause world militaries to mobilize and possibly lead to nuclear standoffs. A single country controlling one or more of those major shipping routes and the surrounding airspace would gain global dominance. Story 88. I am not worried about war, but the genocide from within is terrifying. Story 89. Not really. Despite the fearmongering across Reddit, most countries do not want a large global conflict because it does not benefit them in any real way. Story 90. It is interesting to see how many people are so confident the answer is no. After World War I, the entire world was sure it would never happen again. How could anyone see that and want a second one? There will be a third one. All you have to do is wait. Story 91. We will. It is a numbers game. The denser the population, the greater the casualties. Story 92. I do not think we will see war through the same lens as we do today. Whether wars will be large depends on how many inexpensive military drones China can produce, whether the North Atlantic Treaty Organization takes decisive action against Vladimir Putin, and whether China comes to his aid. I think a Trump presidency would all but guarantee that the United States would stay out of large-scale global military conflict. Consequently, drone wars and their casualties could hyperlocalize conflicts, with the majority of fighting conducted remotely. That prospect is what I fear most. Story 93. Yes. It is called Armageddon and will be the final war. All nations will fight Israel and lose. Story 94. The water wars of 2040 will be significantly worse than anything we can currently imagine. Story 95. Ask me again on Wednesday because if it is going to happen soon, it will be on Tuesday. Story 96. It's already started. Large conflicts between countries or world wars do not begin on a single date. They start small, with numerous clashes that grow over time. Warfare is not limited to physical confrontation. Cyber operations and sanctions are also part of it. Story 97. Yes, because there are plenty more numbers after 2, and we are due. Story 98. Every war is consequential to those affected by it. If you feel that current wars do not matter much, it is probably because they do not affect you. Modern proxy wars may seem small and localized on the surface, but they are actually more connected than the media would have you believe. Story 99. We are in the middle of one right now. It just has not escalated to the mass killing we saw previously because of technology. But eventually it will end the same way. A big bang. Let us hope someone keeps a clear head and does not launch so humanity survives. Story 100. Given who is in charge of the United States right now, I think it is possible. Story 101. Yes, history repeats itself. Philomena Kunk said this is a franchise in the making. Story 102. Yes, and it will end humanity when it does happen. We are not rational creatures. Take away our comfort and stability, and our rationality vanishes like a drop of water on a hot sidewalk. In trying times, people will turn to the lunacy and cruelty of a mad king to lift them out of their despair, and they will support and follow that leader straight to hell. If I can't have the world, then no one can, will be their justification. And if you do not think that can happen, just take a look at what is happening in the United States, the supposed shining bastion of democracy. What is happening in the United States is a warning to other democracies. If it can happen there, it can happen anywhere. Story 103. The destructive power of our nuclear weapons will surpass that of the previous war. There will be fewer troops and conventional forces this time. Story 104. There are many warring factions and widespread violence around the world. We may have learned to wage war in isolation. I just read that nearly 100,000 Christians have been killed in Nigeria in the past 20 years. That is not the only atrocity. Conflicts occur all the time, and it probably always has been this way. Story 105. Like anything in life, it is only a matter of time. World War I should not have happened because almost every country did not want to go to war, but it happened anyway because they felt obliged and assumed at worst it would not last long, only a few weeks or months because of modern technology. World War II should not have happened either, because every country had seen how deadly World War I was and how many resources it required. Yet World War II happened. In the same way, World War III could happen. Nuclear weapons make large-scale war seem irrational, but it could occur if a country plays chicken, miscalculates, and another country retaliates. As in past conflicts, escalation could be rapid. The only questions are how long and how deadly World War III would be. Would it be a short, deadly conflict in which most of the world survives, or a long, destructive war that erases the world we know and leaves only small remnants of civilization? No one knows. When it might occur, 50 years or 500. Even if nuclear weapons deter war now, if a country develops a foolproof way to negate a nuclear strike, the door to old-fashioned large-scale war could reopen because nuclear weapons would no longer be feared. Story 106. World War II killed 3% of the world's population. You are asking whether a modern war could kill 250 million people. Leveling the largest cities of the world could do that. Nuclear weapons could make that possible in an afternoon. Politically, that seems difficult to arrange. The cities are all very different. A slightly different question is whether half the deaths of World War II, about 120 million people, could occur. That seems quite possible. The coastal metropolitan areas of China and the United States of America would be sufficient. Story 107. Armageddon is said to include 200 million horsemen prepared for battle, spirits from Hades who ride into war. World War I had about 40 million combatants, roughly 3% of the global population. A similar percentage for World War II resulted in about 70 million combatants, and applying that percentage to today's population would put us at about 200 million. I think Armageddon began in Ukraine, which, according to the Englinga saga, was the middle of the world and supposedly the burial place of the Watchers and the Sons of God. Story 108. It is only a matter of time because of human nature. We are entirely too foolish for our own survival while being just intelligent enough to develop the means and excuses to cause mass murder over imaginary problems. That is not a good combination. Story 109. Bangladesh has about 173 million people, and much of the country lies less than 1 meter above sea level. This sea level rise is effectively inevitable in most climate scenarios, even if emissions stopped immediately. 173 million people will need to relocate. Such large-scale migration could trigger regional conflicts that escalate into global conflict because disruptions to fragile supply lines can provoke unrest and rapidly intensify. Story 110. Boy, we've only had serious industrialization for the last 1,500 years. We still have a few wars to go through, and I'm sure the third installment of this franchise is one of them. Story 111. Yes, especially with advances in robotics. It will not be nation against nation. It will be corporations against nations and then corporations against corporations. Ukraine recently showed that drones costing between $500 and $1,500 each can do more damage than massive military hardware. That puts war in the consumer market. A $200 billion aircraft carrier can be rendered inoperable by a $500 drone that rips a hole in it or destroys the command deck. Nuclear weapons did not alter much even during the Cold War. Mutual assured destruction meant that if someone used one against a nation, it could lead to everyone's destruction. Story 112. The way the world is currently, I would say no, because frankly, the population would not care enough to fight it. If fascism rose to the extent it did in the 1930s, I think the majority would roll over and accept it. Story 113. The threat will always exist, but we will likely see more economic and proxy wars. These lower-stakes conflicts can still achieve the objectives of bad actors. Information and technology espionage, infrastructure attacks, acts of terrorism, assassinations, and similar actions are more strategically feasible. Today, involving civilians in conflict may eventually be considered a war crime. Civilians will likely continue their daily lives as part of an economic system that supports particular governments or ideologies. Power brokers will manage smaller struggles and tit-for-tat reprisals driven by factional economies. Story 114, probably, but it won't look like World War II. China and allied nations are the most likely adversaries, and while there will be some territorial battles, a large proportion of deaths would result from strikes aimed at disrupting production and civilian life on the home front. The prospect of a world war could be accelerated by an imminent regime change in Moscow leading to state dissolution where nuclear assets are located. If one-party rule in China comes under threat, escalation would again be likely. Looking ahead, if climate change accelerates further and begins significantly altering food production cycles, resources will become constrained. That could trigger territorial conflicts and ethnic cleansing as victor nations seek to secure food for their populations. Story 115. I think there will be an internet war. The global internet outage last year could have been a precursor. Story 116. I just want to point out that there have been a great many posts lately contemplating large-scale war. This means to me we are already far down the authoritarian path because people know in their gut that this is what authoritarians inevitably do. Take their people to war. Story 117. Yes, people often mistreat one another, and too much authority is centralized in too few hands. Story 118. Yes, humanity is multiplying like a virus, without respect for the planet and the environment. We have caused the extinction of thousands of species because of our arrogance and carelessness, and before the next war we will cause even more untold damage. The next war will be fought over natural resources such as water and habitats like forests, but for now we are cutting them down as if there is no tomorrow. Story 119. Waves aimlessly at history. Of course, we are actually pretty close to this. The Russian extremists who believe they are the reincarnations of past imperialists are pushing hard for it. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.